Welcome everyone to Streamlining FTC with coding by using Kotlin, which is presented by me, Hrithik. About me, I'm an 11th grader at Centennial High School. I started FTC in 2019, and I'm a programmer on the team. I enjoy coding, obviously, playing games, listening to music, and playing on my violin. So I'm going to quickly go over the agenda for this session. The main topic which I'm going to be covering is Kotlin. And I know a few of you guys, maybe most of you guys, probably don't know what Kotlin is. Don't worry, I got you covered. We're going to go over what Kotlin is, why test Kotlin in FTC, how to learn Kotlin, and then we're going to go to my case study, which was a servo testing program using Kotlin. I'm going to explain it, to go over my results and conclusions. And we're also going to go over a little bit into a case study which Byron did. He's not here today, but I'll be presenting a bit of it because it kind of is in line with coding in FTC using Kotlin. So Kotlin. So what is Kotlin? Well, Kotlin is a programming language which is designed to synergize with Java. It's pretty similar to Java, but without most of the inconveniences and with an overall better syntax. The reason for this is because Kotlin is actually made by JetBrains, which is the company that made the IntelliJ IDE, which is the IDE which Android Studio is based off of. Hence, it's really easy to implement Kotlin into any of your Java projects. So that's pretty nice. So why test Kotlin in FTC? Well, Kotlin is actually fully supported in Android, which means that you can add Kotlin files seamlessly into an existing repository. Also, the main thing which we want to do is maximize efficiency, especially because there's a lot of times when our programmers, what they're doing is they're coding like at 1 a.m. the night before a tournament, and having to type a lot is really hard, so having to type a little less can just be really beneficial. So how to learn Kotlin. So how I learned Kotlin was during a 3-week duration, during a busy vacation in India. However, I found it really easy and fun as long as you know like Java beforehand. And I followed a video that explains the basics of Kotlin in 3 hours. You can click a picture of the link, and that's what the thumbnail looks like. The recommended IDE, which I used to learn, was IntelliJ. However, you can also use Android Studio, which is what I used for my actual project to implement it into FTC. So here are some Kotlin features which I found really helpful. So the first one I found really helpful was null safety. Null safety basically means there's less possible situations for Kotlin to return a null pointer error in your program. There's also safe and smart cast, as you can see here on this image. You can see normally in Java, when you're like taking like a variable from a function, right? You would have to eventually cast it to the type that it is, and also check. However, since in Kotlin you're already checking, the Kotlin will already know that it is, like let's say in this example, a string, and that way you don't have to cast it to a string before performing x.length. And then next we have ranges and progressions. This is basically an easier way to code like for loops or check like if something is in between. So for example, over here we have if I is in between 1 or 4, then print I, which you can clearly see this is way smaller than having to type all that. Next, we have some syntax niceties. Here's some more examples of how Kotlin maximizes efficiency. There's no need for semicolons at the end of every line now, and this is honestly enough that it took for me to switch over to Kotlin. There's no need to specify variable types. For example, you don't have to add string each time you make a new string variable, and there's no need to add void for functions that return nothing, that don't return anything. So now we're going to go over my case study. So story time. So I think like around 2 years ago, our team was at a robotics tournament, and we were in the finals. But however, right before our second match, one of our servos actually broke down, and we were able to easily replace it. However, what happened was we had to reprogram the servo and redo the code and set the servo positions to the right position. And that took a long time, and by the time we weren't able to go to finals, and I think our second pick had to go instead of us. And so because of that, we now want to have a program on the spot to be able to figure out what position to set the servo to. And we did not want to download the RevHub interface, which I've heard some weird things about it. Yeah, it's really hard to set up, and it's really hard to use. And we also wanted to easily cycle through servos as we're testing it. So basically, the reason why I did this is we wanted to see how writing a servo program from scratch was using Kotlin. We wanted to test how efficient it was to write a regular program in Kotlin from scratch. What this servo program allows for is switching between servos using the gamepad, the D-pad on the gamepad, switching servo position using the joystick, and then saving servo positions and going to save positions using the A, B, X, Y buttons. So here's some pictures of the code. I know this is actually just the declarations, because something I realized later in my project was that actually the difference between Java and Kotlin for my project was actually not as different. However, luckily, Byron also did some things with Kotlin, and I'll be showing that later on. However, here's like a prime example of some things Kotlin helps with. For example, in Java, you have to specify whether it's a double or if it's a gamepad wrapper. However, in Kotlin, all you need to specify if it's a variable or a value. A variable basically just means that it can be changed. However, a value means it's set in stone, and that's really it. You don't have to define whether it's a double, integer, or a string, and that just saves a lot of time. So now this is what Byron worked on. To be honest, there's a lot to talk here, so I have some speaker notes to go over. I'm sorry if I'm going to be looking at my phone for most of the time. But as you can see here, there's a Java implementation and a Kotlin implementation. So this is basically what it would have looked like before we implemented into Kotlin. So one of the very important features of Kotlin that is not in Java is the idea of first-class functions. The idea that you can use functions as variables and do things with them, such as passing them in arrays. That's really helpful. One way we're able to use this for implementing is by implementing a delayer in teleop, which in case you want to run a function with a delay, say around like 2 seconds, in Java, this has been achieved by passing a custom string abstract method, and it ends up being very wordy, as you can see. However, you can see over here in Kotlin, we achieve it by using only one line, and by simply passing a function as a parameter for another function. I know it seems really complex, but as you go through your days as a programmer, this is really helpful, and you'll eventually get to this level. So next, you have first-class functions, list of functions. So first-class functions are very powerful. You can treat, as we said earlier, you can treat functions as variables in Kotlin, and that's basically what Byron was really able to kind of abuse in his case study. Not only you can treat them as functions as variables, not only by putting them into parameters, but by also making lists of functions. As you can see here, he made a list of an arm raise function, a Macaro left function, and a light LED. And in the init, he has the robot apply those functions. And you can see another example of it over here. The advantage to doing this is over simply adding all the functions in the init is nor is that you get a lot more flexibility. You can modify the list during the runtime instead of having to recompile the whole code. So then this is the final slide of his case study. So he says, we can put all these ideas together to create a Gamepad binder class. The idea is that instead of checking with if statements in a teleop loop to make buttons do things, we get access to a way to bind buttons to actions, which is a lot more readable than you can see. The core idea here, again, is that we get to pass a function as a parameter to another function. In this case, we're passing the action we want to do into the function to bind the gamepad. We also pass in a representation of which button variable we want to check. Now in the bind gamepad function, we can add all this data to a list of bound gamepad buttons that we check every loop. We had to do a lot of work with Kotlin's first class functions and figuring out gamepad buttons on the back end to make this work. But once it does, you only have to write the code once, and you make teleop a lot more simpler to code. So here's an example of it all in action. So now conclusions. So first conclusion is that Kotlin is very easy to program with. It's very easy to start with, but it also has a lot of complex ends which you can really abuse. It takes time to get used to it. However, it saves a lot of time overall. I was really used to Java. However, and at first switching to Kotlin was a bit weird when I started writing my own servo testing program. However, I eventually got used to it. It has a lot of powerful features like first class functions, as we showed before, and it's a lot easier to look at too. However, one thing I noticed is that it requires your SDK to be very up to date. Personally for me, I had a lot of errors with Android Studio for some reason. I wasn't able to solve them until I reinstalled Android Studio. Another thing is that it's more compact in general, which is basically kind of it's easier to look at too. And one more thing is that for me, personally for my project, next time I would try writing a more complex program to take advantage of Kotlin fully, kind of like how Byron did. Here is how many characters I had when I coded it in Java, and that's how many characters I had when I coded it in Kotlin. So you can see it's clearly a little less characters. So yeah. So we only have time for I think 2 or 3 questions. So
we're actually going to take all of the questions at the end of the session because we're running behind on time. So just keep your questions in mind, and then we'll do all of them at the very end.
Okay.
So next we're going to have
Thank you.
Joseph.